I have a million questions that I'm asked all the time about being an entrepreneur. What's it like, and is it scary being an entrepreneur, and how did you get started? And there's a million questions people want to ask you. And I thought to myself, bang, one day, wouldn't it be great to have an entrepreneur's masterclass where I can bring some of these unbelievable people, people like we read about them and we read their stories. They're legendary, but we only see them on film and we have visualization of what they are. But actually to sit down with them and talk to them, I thought, wouldn't that be a wonderful way to learn? Nothing's new. I remember watching the old actor classes several years ago, how they visualized and how they created their careers and how they just kept getting better and better. And I thought to myself at that time, what a wonderful way for a young person to learn the craft directly from the old guys. I thought it was a very elegant way to teach. Well, our today's guest is Dave Steele. I've known Dave for decades, and I'm really looking forward to this interview. I can't believe it, Dave, decades. Dave is the co-founder and general partner of Western Wealth Capital. His company is focused on creating wealth for their clients through well-selected investment real estate. Western Wealth targets its cash-flowing properties in North America's top investment markets. And over the last 6 years, Dave and his team have raised over $600 million in private equity, acquiring over 75 multifamily properties with over 16,000 rental units, which are valued at over $2 billion. David has been very active involved in the growth of the Entrepreneurs Organization, known as EO. EO is a nonprofit organization with over 12,000 members worldwide. In 93 and 94, Dave served as the international chairman of EO. He has his Bachelor of Commerce degree with a major in finance from the University of Calgary. Now, to conduct the interview today, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Tim Raschulte, who's going to tell much more about Dave's background and ask him some very stimulating questions so that he can share his secrets of entrepreneurial success. Tim, thanks for facilitating today, and I'm handing over to you now. And like all of you, I'm going to sit back and listen and learn.
Well, thanks so much, Peter, and welcome everyone. I too am very much looking forward to this interview and conversation with Dave. And Dave, maybe just to kick things off, Peter just provided a bit of background on you and all of the great successes and areas that you've been involved in. But I'd love to just get your background specifically from you. Would you mind sharing a bit of your background and specifically as it pertains to thinking about entrepreneurship and your entrepreneurial journey with EO and outside of EO and your practices? How did it start and what initiated the spark around entrepreneurial work?
Well, thanks, Tim. That's a very nice introduction, Peter. It's usually after an introduction like that, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. I went to the University of Calgary in Canada. Was never a great student. My claim to fame was I graduated in the top 10% of the bottom third of my class every year. But it was quite interesting because the last year of university, I was the president of the university ski club. And one of the other classmates of mine who I didn't know very well, Phil Carroll, came up to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to put on a big party at the end of the year." And that spurred us putting on a party called the Buck Off, which was the largest party in the history of the University of Calgary. We ended up having about 1,500 people come to a huge party on the last day of school at a ranch. And we got so engrossed in putting on this party that we almost flunked out our last year. But what it really taught us was that we really could work together, and it really began a 30-year entrepreneurial journey the two of us had. So from that, Phil and I, as soon as we graduated, we both each took one job, him as a financial planner, me as a mortgage broker. But really every day we would meet for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and just plan ideas. Wow, we saw this. Wonder if we could make a business out of that. And, very interesting thing is a famous Canadian back when we were going to university was a gentleman by the name of Peter Pocklington. And he owned the Edmonton Oilers hockey team. And near the end of university, he came and spoke to our business class. And one of the things he said at the business class was, if you have a good idea, make sure it's a big idea, because you're going to spend just as much time on a big idea as you will on a small idea. So if you got an idea, make sure it's a big one, which we translated, and it really became our mantra for 30, 40 years, which is, go big or go home. If you've got an idea, make sure it's a big idea. And from that, as soon as we got out of university, we kind of fell into the houseboat business. and we built the largest houseboat rental company in North America. Had 15 marinas all across Canada and the U.S., had a huge manufacturing facility in the interior of BC, and that was really fun. But that was the beginning of kind of our entrepreneurial roots. And then from there, it's just always moved back into real estate. So we've always kind of migrated into real estate.
What were some of those pivotal points, Dave, along the way that made you realize that not only was this going to be a fun journey with great people to collaborate with and be colleagues and friends, but that you knew that you were going to be successful? Was there pivotal points along the way that it's like, wow, this is really going to take off because not only is it a big idea, but it is a really good idea and we can operationalize it and then monetize it? Were there some points along the way that you realized that, wow, this is really going to work?
Great question, Tim. Probably the biggest one for me, for sure, was meeting Phil, because we really were kindred spirits. And, at the end of the day, the fact that, we both, I was always an entrepreneur and he was always an entrepreneur. And I think we just always knew, from the first paper route I had when I was 10 years old, we just always knew that, this idea, even going to university, it was never a fit for me because, as an entrepreneur, you're also much more sales oriented. And so here you are in business learning finance and accounting and things that just aren't generally skills that people that are entrepreneurial start with. Usually it's, outgoing and sales and meeting people and having a vision. And so, as soon as we met each other, that was probably the most pivotal thing.
One thing I'd be curious to know is when you think about deals, whether it's about, opening up the next marina or something on the real estate side or the private equity side, wherever that deal might be, how would you think about success? The idea of success. What does success mean and look like to you as an entrepreneur? And has that changed over the years with deals and partnerships and people that you've engaged in?
Yeah, I mean, success at the beginning is so much different, because we started with nothing, right? I was a mortgage broker. I was doing really well. And we decided that we were going to quit our full-time jobs. Actually, I decided that I would quit mine first and Phil would continue working as a financial planner. And we would take the money that he was making and that's what we would live off of. So I went and told my boss, and he owed me a big bonus check. And he said, hey, sorry, I'm not going to pay you the bonus check. I went and told my girlfriend, hey, I've quit my job. And she said, great, but, I want something more stable. And she broke up with me. The next day I got a letter in the mail saying, hey, the lease payment on your car, you don't have a job anymore. You don't get to keep your car. So all of a sudden, here was this massive vision I have of good, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And I wake up the next day, I have no girlfriend, I have no car, and I'm like, I have no job. And then we both realized, hey, we couldn't afford to keep the apartment I had. So I gave back the keys to my apartment and moved into my partner Phil's parents' basement suite. So this, wow, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and look at all the things I have, was a pretty hard kick in the stomach. And all of a sudden we had nothing, right? But so if you look at that, for the first probably 2 years, it was really, the success was, can we make payroll? Do we have enough money that we can pay our bills at the end of the month? Are we out borrowing money from friends and family? And then all of a sudden your business starts to get a little bit of momentum and you think, wow, I've got a bit of money in the bank. To today where, our companies have done extremely well. And now you look for the part that can fulfill you with more than just the business, right? What kind of an impact can we really have as a company? So, I think it's a great question because you really have to answer it at a point in time, right? It's awesome at the beginning if you have a social impact that you want to make in your company. But the truth of it is, you're probably going to go through the beginning of starting your company scratching and clawing just to make enough money to be able to get by.
Other type things, such as you brought up, that kick in the stomach. Sometimes, things don't go as you expected, right? Things don't happen from a financial perspective, like getting that big bonus or other type things. What were some of the, really low points? Because clearly you've reached a really high point of success, and most all individuals that I'm aware of don't reach that high point of success without some really low points of challenge and the need for fortitude and persistence and moving forward with that level of optimism and hope. What were some of the low points, and maybe what were some things that you learned from those low points you still stick with today and carry with you as lessons learned as you work on deals today?
Well, it's quite interesting. Going back to the houseboats, we decided we had built 2 houseboats, and the Canadian government had a loan program that allowed us to borrow the money to build the first 2 boats. So we built the 2 boats. Then I decided that I was going to quit my job, and so now we won't go build another 20 boats. We'd figured out the mousetrap, and the mousetrap was that the houseboat industry was built on people building really lousy boats. There was no stereos in them. There was no fridges in them. We were the first people to put water slides in it so you could go down a water slide off the back deck. We were the first people to put child-proof railings around the top so you felt safe bringing your kids up. We designed them so you could drive from both the top and the bottom. So we had figured out we had taken the idea that you go on a houseboat vacation and it was much more than going camping, right? So now we had to go and sell this vision. So the idea was that we would go find individual investors that would want to buy one of these boats, let us manage it and rent it out on their behalf. So it sounded like a pretty good idea. In fact, there was even very favorable tax benefits. We found a tax accountant and he said, hey, if you build these in Canada, there's really favorable tax benefits to the person buying it. So we went out and we started knocking on doors. Phil took the white pages in the phone book. He took dentists. I took lawyers, he took doctors, I took accountants, and we would sit downstairs and we would just call and call and call. And finally, one day after weeks of doing this, and we got people that would meet with us and talk about it, but nobody was ready to write a check for $50,000 or $60,000 to buy one. Phil's brother Randy came downstairs in the basement one day and said, guys, you need to get people out to the lake and they need to experience this. And if they experience it, you're going to come away and they're going to go, wow, this is a phenomenal thing. So we put all the people on we booked an airplane for 2 weeks out on a Sunday. And it took us everything in our power to convince all these people to come we would fly them on a small plane about a 2-hour flight away. And we would show them the houseboats and show them why our mousetrap was better. And so we got everybody to the airport. It was a beautiful day. Oh, by the way, we were out of money. So to book the airplane, we had to borrow $1,500 from Phil's mom. So Phil's mom lent us the money. She was an entrepreneur. She said, hey, no problem. So we booked the airplane. We got the 7 people out to the airport. And we're standing in the airport just about to board the plane. And the pilot comes over the microphone. He says, I'm terribly sorry, but due to icing over the mountains today, we can't fly. So we looked at each other and we just, all the investors turned and walked away. We said, we'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure out what we're going to do. And we were devastated. We went home and sat on the couch. I don't think we talked for the whole day. And when we got up the next day, Phil called his 3 or 4 people. I called my 3 or 4 people, and they all said the same thing. Hey, it seemed like it was a pretty good idea, but I guess it's not meant to be. It's not for us. So the 7 people that had taken us a month and a half to convince to come on this flight all said no. So at this point, we were ready to close the company. We'd had enough. We'd said, look, it's just not in the cards. I'll go back to my job. Phil will keep going with his job. So we phoned the airline and we said, hey, can we get our $1,500 back so that we can pay back Phil's mom? And he said, you obviously didn't read the contract. The contract says it's non-refundable. However, if you want, you can use it for another time. So we said, well, no sense losing the money. Let's book it for the following Sunday. Even though we had no one to come, we had no hot leads, we had no one interested. So we literally got on the phone 16, 17 hours a day and called and called and called. And finally, by the following Sunday, including driving to one fellow's house at 7 o'clock on the way and shaking him out of bed, putting him in the car, we got 7 people on the plane and we flew the 2-hour flight. Well, it was the most glorious day probably that I've ever seen. The sky was blue. It was the sky was so clear that we could actually fly over the highway, which is very rare because you fly through the Rockies. So it was a glorious day. We landed. We could tell the investors were impressed. Nobody, got off the plane and said, here's the check, but we knew there was some pretty good interest. Phil got up Monday morning and went and saw his 3 or 4 people. I got up and went and saw my 3 or 4 people. We met back in the basement at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on that Monday afternoon. He opened his briefcase. I opened my briefcase. And between us, we had 7 checks from 7 people, each for $50,000. And that really started our company. So, the absolute lowest point when we were sure we were going to lose our company, a week later transcended into, just probably one of the biggest highs we could have in our company.
It's great to see that perseverance. And, the interesting parallel is, back to the college days, you put an event together with those 7 people, put them on a plane, took them out to the lake, and they turned into customers, very big fans of what you were doing. And it was another event that you put on.
Think about it, because here I am 40 years later, we're raising money from people that buy real estate, and our formula of, hey, we have a property, let's do a tour and bring 20, 30, 40 people. It's the same repeatable, scalable process that started off being successful 40 years ago, right? So, it's crazy when you think about it. It becomes things that you do that just get ingrained in how you do things that you don't even think about it till so much time passes.
Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of your entrepreneurial journey? Like, if you were to describe looking back on that 40 years and where you are now and key takeaways, can you even describe it in just a few words, or how would you describe it?
Well, yeah, I would say that, Tim, the common theme of it in my mind, the commonality is repeatability and scalability. And it's, the more you do it and the more companies you have, the faster you're able to do it. You look at Peter's success with franchising. Franchising is all about repeatability and scalability. And hey, I'm in 5 locations or 10 locations. How do I make sure that McDonald's hamburger tastes the same everywhere? So in our business, it's exactly the same. A tenant or a resident is renting from us. How do I make sure that experience they're going through is the same in Phoenix as it is in Dallas, as it is in San Antonio? So it's really about, just the 2 things are repeatability and scalability, but ingraining yourself so deeply in the experience that you're providing the customer that that experience so well, and you're just driven to make that experience for them so much better. So it's like, jump into those shoes and say, how do I make that experience really phenomenal for whoever's buying from me? Because when I can do that, and then as soon as I make a change, I always ask myself, hey, is it making the experience better? Or is it just something I'm trying to do? Maybe I can make more money, but if it's not making the experience better, then I don't really want to just do it just to make more money. It's like, how do I keep turning the wheel? And then once you find those things, you make them repeatable.
It's great advice and great perspective that has stood the test of time and will likely continue to stand the test of time, because at the essence and at the core of that is really creating the great experience for your customers. And so I so appreciate that. Peter, I know that you probably have lots of questions at this point. I'm going to ask you to chime in and share some questions and comments and perspectives.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for sharing. Nothing better than stories to share, to learn the how-tos. A question I've got, Dave, if I were a sort of a 30-year-old entrepreneur now listening to you tell your story, I'd like you to share, Dave, instead of sharing your habits that make you successful, what do you think that you do that's different from what maybe, because you watch other people fail all the time. We see it happen all the time in business. What do you think is different about what you do that see you through success, different times, different industries, but ultimately always successful?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's the number one item would probably be focus. Is that I just really, I think when I get an idea, the positive side of focus it's called focus. The negative side of focus is called stubbornness. So you always have to find that balance of not being so stubborn and set in the idea. But I think what we always try to do is find the things. Robert Kulhawi, a good friend of ours, always says it. You pick the things that you're prepared to plant your flag on the hillside and die over, and then those are non-negotiable. And everything else is open for changing and tweaking, but really getting clear on the items that are just central to the experience. And so I would say those habits are they're tough because you could spend your life negotiating and debating and changing everything that everyone in your company does, and that takes the life out of the enthusiasm in the company. So it's how do you let people run, but how do you say strong? How do you say strong to the items that are really non-negotiable?
And the other thing, Dave, is you've historically throughout your career, successful people attract successful people, and I'd like you to share a bit of how do you go about attracting the teams that you do, so that you have a winning team.
Yeah. I mean that's really a great point. I would say as you get older, what you tend to do is you tend to meet people that you realize are superstars, and you tend to catalog their name and their information, and you tend to actually I can't believe how many in the last 10 years people that we've hired or have brought onto our team at a time when we didn't even need them and we didn't have a position for them. We just knew they were really great people, and they've ultimately evolved into what we're doing. As an example, we just hired the CFO 6 months ago. He was the CFO of Van City. So here's a Van City, which is a multi-billion-dollar credit union bank, and so you look at it and you go, what's a little company like ours doing with potentially even in the running to be hiring someone like this? And then you realize, wow, if we keep going on the pace that we're on, in another 9 months or 12 months or 16 months, we're going to need somebody really good. So yeah, it might cost us a little bit of money early, but how do you get these people and how do you really bring them on? Because at the end of the day, that's really what drives the business, is how you find the key people. So it's almost like identify, focus, and spend a huge amount of your time getting those people lined up earlier.
Another thing I'd like to ask you, I found, here you've sort of said for 40 years, you found this formula when you guys were sort of young, getting started, this formula that worked, just going out, knocking on doors and getting the money and putting the deals together like that. Have you ever, and I'm going to call that your playbook, just for lack of a better word, I think that's Dave's playbook. Have you ever gotten off your playbook and paid for it? Like it didn't work?
I've gotten off the playbook and gone into, we're in the newspaper business, right? Which is about as far away business in the world from real estate or raising money. Now, the only difference is that if you can sell ads, if you can sell newspaper advertising, you can sell anything. And so, again, for me, I look at it and go, hey, that was a really good place to identify talent in terms of people that can sell, right? Because, as you know, in the real estate world and in the money raising world, there's only two types of people that can do it and people that can't. There's very few people that will come into the money raising business or the real estate world who you can just take from zero and train all the way up. They've either got it or they don't. I don't know what it is. It's maybe it's a simple thing like you meet someone and as they walk through the door, you've decided if you might invest with them or not, and you've decided that in the first 10 seconds. So, but the reality is I would say we completely got off our playbook, but because it was a completely different business, and we did quite well in the business, but again, it never felt comfortable. It always felt like where we should be going is back to where we really were comfortably in our business.
Times like right now, when we as CEOs, we run these big organizations, and a lot of people count on us doing what we do. But we sit at the top of the organization. We look at everything that's going on in the world. Also, we're just part of that. Do you, looking ahead? I know the story. There's been 1,000 depressions, and we always get through it, and we're always positive. Is there a reason that you can tell me why you're positive about? Because I know you are. So why are you positive about the future?
Well, I'm positive because I think the mega trends that we've known were going to happen are really going to happen, and they're now even going to happen faster, right? Take an example. I think there's a huge migration of people that are going to leave big cities and move to smaller places, right? I think there's people that are living in smaller cities that are going to go even further out to smaller towns. So I think those trends, so that's number one. Number two is there's clearly a trend that anything that can be automated and anything that you can use technology is going to move even faster. So I think you've got these trends that are happening. So the real question is, are you in a business, or do you see a business where you can jump on one of those trends and really take advantage of it, right? We're probably never going back to working at offices to the level that we have. That whole trend of people working from the home, that trend is now the horse has left the barn, and that trend is taking off. So I would say if you've got a business idea that fits in and you can see it really being driven, understand what the trend is, because the trend is really the tailwind that makes your business fly. If the trend is, boy, I think I'll go open up another bricks and mortar store downtown, then that might not be a tailwind, that might be a headwind. So really, what I'm positive about is, how do you find the businesses that are really amazing? And as you and I have talked about in real estate, the biggest single trend that's driving multifamily rental properties today is more people are paying their rent online than ever before. So one of the biggest single parts of renting apartments is, how do you collect the rent? Well, imagine if you woke up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on rent collection day and 100% of your tenants had paid their rent online. So you don't need to spend the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 days knocking on people's doors saying, where's your rent? They just automatically paid it and came out of their bank account. Well, that's a fundamental change in the property management world. So the question is, whatever business you're in, how do you find those fundamental changes that are happening? And I always say to people, look, whatever your business is, take 3 or 4 of the big trends that you think and ask yourself, are they really helping or hurting you? And then look and say, what piece of technology is there that I could apply to what I want to do that's going to really supercharge my business?
I always remember the story years and years ago. I heard about the guy in the horse and buggy business, and going bankrupt because cars came along, and he just never realized he was in the transportation business, not the horse and buggy business. And that's what you're saying. You're in the trending of the business. You look at where that business is going.
And someone said to me the other day about a restaurant. They said, yeah, the favorite restaurant, they're not going to make it because they only can keep 50% of the people in the restaurant. I went to my favorite restaurant. They doubled their prices. Walked in the door. He didn't apologize. He said, look, if for me to stay in business, I have to double my prices. It used to cost you $150 for you and your girlfriend to have dinner here. It's now $300. And he goes, I hope you'll support me, because at $150, I can't stay in business. Now, how many other businesses are going to sit there and say, I got to keep my price the same? He just stepped in and said, I'm going to take my medicine. I'll find out if people will buy it or not. If they don't, probably out of business anyhow at $150, but I have a shot if I can actually charge $300 and people will pay for the experience.
Dave, when you think about those trends and those shifts, no doubt you've done that over the last several decades. Do you explain how you do that? Do you do that just, how do you acquire the knowledge? Do you work with just members of your team? Do you have cross teams made up of futurists and folks from universities and think tanks and others? To walk us through how you kind of work through, where are we right now in the ebb and flow of markets? Where are we right now of the trending of major occurrences? How do we think about adding slides to the back of houseboats? How do we think about the user experience and the overall enjoyment of this? Walk us through how you go about that. I think that would be helpful for some of our entrepreneurs listening into the masterclass, the how-to side of understanding the fundamentals and the macro trends, and then applying that to what we're doing every day.
Well, I mean, the how-to is very, very simple. Go to where your customers are and stand there and talk to them. Stand and ask them, hey, what do you like? What don't you like? We used to have comment cards on our houseboats, and I used to stand there with a stack of comment cards, and as they would hand them in, I would say, hey, do you have a couple minutes? I'd love to ask you a couple questions, and I'd just get them talking. Hey, by the way, if you put the barbecue on the other side of the railing, it wouldn't bang against the door every time you opened the door, right? If you bolted this in instead of screw, if it ever came loose, you can always rebuild it and tighten it. So, a perfect example was we had the guy that made our couches, and our couches on the houseboats folded out into double beds. And so they delivered the first couch to our factory the first time we built it. We had these two guys in the factory that were 6'4", 230 pounds. And so we said to the guy, hey, by the way, do you mind if our guys test your couch? And the guy said, sure, no problem. So they came running across the floor, jumped in the air, landed on the couch, it shattered into 20 pieces. And the guy said, oh my God. He goes, what did you do? And we said, we just tested your couch. What do you think people on the houseboats are going to do when they've had 12 beer? So he came back a week later, new couch. He said, bring your two guys on. There's no way they're smashing this. They jumped in the air. Couch didn't move. Well, he braced it 10 different ways. He figured it out. And we never had a problem with our couches breaking because, again, you're turning over boats quickly. You don't have time for this. So to me, it's all about how do you get the information, mostly from the customer. As soon as we went into the pandemic, one of the first things my partner Janet and I did is she organized a call with 6 or 7 other really large apartment owners. So collectively, we had owners together that owned about 125,000 apartment buildings. And she organized a call 2 o'clock in the afternoon every Thursday, every second Thursday. And everybody could send in an agenda and we would talk about the items. What are you doing to collect the rent? What are you doing to make sure it's safe for your staff? What are you doing with the gym? Like, how many people are you allowing in the gym in your apartment building? Some people with 0, we're going to keep it closed. Some people decided they were going to completely close their leasing office, period, and not accept any more tenants. So we sat there and said, you got to be kidding. Like, how do you say, no, I'm not taking new people? I have empty apartments. I'm not taking anybody. So we actually came up with a plan where the leasing people would sit inside the leasing office, and when people would come to the door, they'd connect with them on FaceTime, and they would walk them. They would show them where to walk while they talked to them on FaceTime. They'd tour through the unit, and if they wanted to lease, there'd be an iPad right outside the door, and they'd fill in the application. So in one fell swoop, it completely changed the way leasing apartment went, right? So we got on the call with all the big owners a week later. We shared exactly what we did. 2 or 3 other owners jumped on it and said, hey, we're doing this, this, and this. And collectively, you know, we all got better at it. Now, a lot of people would say, well, geez, Dave, you don't share information like that with your competition. But as soon as everybody dropped their guards and realized, hey, we're all going through something we've never gone through again, what's the harm in there's no harm in helping each other here. If you get an extra lease and I get an extra lease, you know, great. So to me it's how do you gather the experts in your area, number one, and number two, all the information you need is with your customers, right? Everything you want, you can ask them, and you'll get more feedback than you ever want.
Yeah, I think that perspective on where competition starts and where collaboration needs to begin isn't often taught in a university. And, you know, I would suspect that you may not have had that same perspective as a young entrepreneur, because a lot of times we're taught that, you know, you've got to bury the competition, and, you know, you've got to hold everything in, and there's not that same sense of collaboration and sharing of best practices, because often I have found that the difference between best practices is what can be executed on the field, not what's talked about in the stands. And so is that one thing you think you've learned over the years? And what might be a couple other things that changed from that idea of success and the way in which you compete on the field that have changed over the last few decades for you, Dave?
Well, you know, probably the biggest one, Tim, is you know, when I graduated university, like, entrepreneurship was not a thing. Like, if you were an entrepreneur, you were, you know, your parents had to tell the neighbors, hey, I got a problem. You know, my kid's becoming an actor, my kid's becoming an entrepreneur. Like, it was not a, you know, today it's widely accepted. There's lots of courses, there's majors in entrepreneurship. Sort of like, if you became an entrepreneur, you were this misunderstood person generally coming out of business, right? So, I mean, obviously it's changed significantly. So I would say, you know, that's probably the biggest single difference is when you look back to compared to today. And, you know, the beauty of it today is, you know, as people become more successful, everyone's looking for an easier way to do it, right? They realize, there's a hard way to do this and there's an easier way to do this. And again, I think that's why mentorship is so important, because, you can get a quick answer to a lot of things that you'll spend a lot of money learning, that if you find the right mentor, that mentor can set you on the path very quickly.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to get into mentorship, and I know that's a question that Peter likes to bring up quite a bit. Peter, why don't I pass it back to you, whether it be about mentorship or otherwise. I know we'll get into mentorship here during this conversation, but Peter, additional comments or questions?
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote down, Dave, I wrote the Band of Thieves, EO mentorship. You've always had a close alignment with people you really care for, who really aren't like you. They add to you. And I thought maybe you could talk. I happen to know you well, so I thought maybe you'd like to talk a bit about mentorship from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Peter and I were involved in EO, the entrepreneurship organization. Probably one of the proudest things that I will take to my grave is just what we all created, building that organization. Most people join organizations like that because in school they teach you to join places and network, right? If you network and you go to these events, you're going to get lots of business, right? Well, when you join the right organizations, even though you should join it because of networking, the networking doesn't get you business for probably 10 years. But for the first 10 years, you build friendships and relationships with a lot of people. And if you build those friendships and relationships, the amount of business you get 10 years later is off. It's crazy how much business comes out of it, because when someone says, "Hey, I need to move," my friend Larry, we've known through EO for 30 years. There's nowhere else I would even consider going to move without phoning Larry. So all of a sudden you have this situation where, you get this network of people, and the mentorship is amazing because it's very like-minded people. It's all entrepreneurs. It's people that are all heading down a path, albeit completely different businesses. So it's really just about, how do you go and find places, and there's a difference between networking and mentorship and like-mindedness. So you need to do certain things. Join your trade associations if you want, again, for different reasons. But a lot of people will come into groups like EO and YPO, and they'll come in with all guns blazing to try to get every bit of business that there is. And if you do it in the wrong order, it doesn't get you any business. It actually hurts you.
I totally understand what you're saying, because it gets crazy. But one of the things about mentorship that I think is important, a lot of times people call me and would I be their mentor? And what they're really looking for is a coach. And a coach and a mentor are just worlds apart. I was like a coach tells you how to hold the bat and how to stand at the plate and all those kind of things, whereas a mentor tells you whether you should be playing ball or hockey or doing something else. And I think it's so critical. I think coaching is really important for people. Have you ever had a coach, Dave, yourself? Have you ever had a coach?
My partner, Phil, was on the strategic coach program for about a year. And so, we shared in a lot of that information. I've never actually had a coach, although, it's funny because, we got in with the mentoring, you sort of, as you're mentoring other people, you sort of look and think, gosh, there's a lot of things I wouldn't mind a mentor on as well, even though, and I think you're right about the mentoring is really what are the really massive challenges or problems that you're about to embark on, that you really want to have someone who's gone through it before, right? What do those look like? If I was going to sell my company tomorrow, before I went down a path and said, hey, I'm going to sell my company, who would I want to talk to that said, hey, by the way, that these are the 3 mistakes I made when I sold my company?
Yeah, Dave, I think part of what you just mentioned there about mentorship, it is about, what others have experienced. And the experience is so important. I think that's one of the differences between mentors and coaches as well. That a coach can teach you how to swing better, but a mentor's, you really want somebody who has been there and struck out 1,800 times as well as hit 1,800 home runs to really understand the power. You've talked about Phil, you've talked about Peter, you talked about Robert. Were there other individuals that were pivotal throughout your successful career, Dave? And who might they have been, and how did they help you, in boom times and, really challenging times? Would you mind providing a couple other examples of people that have really mentored during times of that, whether they were true mentors or not?
Yeah, we had a couple of early investors who stayed mentors for probably 15 years, and they were just phenomenal because they owned and operated really large businesses. I was in a forum group both in YPO and EO, which is a group of 10 or 12 people that meet every single month. And so, I would say indirectly there was a lot of very, very good mentorship, because the first time I joined, the average age in the group was 47 or 48, and I was 25. So that was certainly, well, first of all, very intimidating at the beginning, because here's people with $200-300 million businesses, and we were a couple of years into a really growing business, but nowhere near the kind of challenges and that those companies were facing. So yeah, I mean, I've always, although I've had mentors, I've never really formally, probably less than most people really formally had, regular mentor meetings, but lots of people that I've, and again, with EO, the benefit is that, we've been in EO now for over 30 years. So a lot of the really early members were such good friends that part of EO is it's sharing, caring, and trusting. And it's not about talking to your friends about news, weather, and sports. It's talking about, hey, what's really going on in your personal life, what's really going on in your business. And so you end up, getting a bond with people that's just, it's probably way beyond even mentorship.
Yeah, you talked about your proudest moment, and I'm kind of curious about, what you look back on to say, well, this was really our most successful moment as entrepreneurs. What may that have been?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. We won, you'd think it'd be the awards, right? We won Canadian Entrepreneur of the Year in 1985, Phil and I, we won, countless marketing entrepreneur awards. And so you'd look back, I look at Janet, my partner, she's winning all the 40 under 40 awards, all the top awards. So you look back and you kind of realize all that stuff is great. It's also a little divisive, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a bit of a disconnect with your investors. Here you're getting recognition, and the truth of it is that you're only there because this whole team of people got you there, and so you're constantly reinforcing that to people. Otherwise, it's just an ego trip, and if it's an ego trip, then you're not going to keep your company at that level very long. So, you'd think that the awards would be the proudest moment. I think, probably amongst the proudest moment is now how much of the stuff we're doing in the company that's becoming, really ingrained charitable. As an example, we do a couple programs with our apartment communities. On the first day of school every year, we give out free backpacks with school supplies to every kid, every child in every one of our apartment communities. And so, when you look at that, you realize, hey, a lot of these kids are going to school with no school supplies, right? Parents can't quite stretch it to pay for school supplies and a backpack. So, we rally our own money and all of our sponsors, and we bring in really cool, Star Trek and, all these really cool backpacks for the kids. And the kids get to come in and pick their favorite backpack and get the school supplies. So you realize in the place you live, you can really make a difference. And then the second thing we do is that every December, we have the property manager choose one family in every one of our communities that's going through a really tough time, and we give them rent-free December. So we give them rent-free December for Christmas, right? Because you realize someone's just lost their husband or their wife, or they're fighting cancer, or there's something where, and usually the property manager can name that person. They don't even have to think for a second. They go, it's Tom and Mary in Suite 207. So you look at those things and you realize, there's now a legacy of doing that across 75 properties. There's a legacy of thousands of kids getting the backpacks for the We've Got Your Back. And it just becomes ingrained in that. And you realize now it's not even about how many apartment buildings we want to buy or how many units. It's really about, hey, for every one we buy, it just gives us that much more of an ability to help this many more people. So, I guess, again, it's a little bit about when you're younger, your ego and the glory and the awards. And the first just a pure success of, my gosh, I'm not going to lose this company. I'm not going to go bankrupt, up to you suddenly get success. And now to being able to help people in the places where they live.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that perspective and that success rate, and congratulations for that, and thank you for the generosity and those best practices and just those principles by which you operate your business. And I know Peter has some other questions. I'm going to come to Peter in just a minute, but one follow-up question to that, Dave. As you think about that level of success today, there's an aspect of understanding of giving back and the recognition that there is this opportunity. It's a mindset as well. I am kind of curious about your entrepreneurial mindset. You've mentioned earlier on when we first started the interview, college wasn't necessarily your thing. You wanted to be kind of an entrepreneur. You found that when you put that first event together with Phil. And I am kind of wondering, did you always have a mindset of optimism? Clearly, when the ice on the mountains, wrecked up the plane ride, you may not have been highly optimistic at that time, but you had the perseverance to continue to move forward. And there's a level of optimism there that, hey, let's try one more time. Let's try one more time. And it's clearly worked. Do you recognize the power of mindset and your optimistic mindset as a mechanism of success for you, or not at this point?
I mean, no question. If I look back to the beginning of when we started, 40 years ago, it was going to, free events would come to town, and Zig Ziglar would come to town, and Tony Robbins would do free events on a Saturday morning, and you'd go to those free events, and we were hooked on those. I mean, we would go to everyone coming through town, every speaker, and again, eventually, what you quickly realize is, the speed of the ship is the speed of the captain, and if the captain doesn't, the people that are shoveling the coal into the ship, they're shoveling it if they're inspired, if they're motivated, if they're in a positive environment. If you're not able to keep positive and keep that energy and have that optimism, you're never gonna inspire people. So I guess over time, it's probably no different than a habit of riding your bike every day or going to the gym or working out or doing yoga. You just start off. And again, I look at, most of the people that I know, that we're all from that land. And so, you just start with a really positive, it's so funny because we're talking about the pandemic, and I said to somebody, I said, my God, this happened to us 30 years ago, how many new businesses we would have started? And they're like, someone was standing there who's not an entrepreneur, and they're like, guys, I don't even understand how you guys think. And I go, yeah, I mean, that's the difference, right? And the other one, and I'll go to your next question, but the other one that's very common is, I'll get a call from lots of my friends, and that, they'll say, hey, my son or my daughter, they're just not figuring this out. They're not motivated. They don't want to go to university. Would you do me a favor? You're very sales and entrepreneurial. Would you go have a talk to them? And I'll go have a talk with them, and I'll be like, your problem is no one's diagnosed you. You're an entrepreneur. You just need to realize you've got to follow this path for a little bit longer. You've got to go to university. You've got to get your base skills. But ultimately, you're an entrepreneur, and no one's told you that. Your dad's an engineer, your mom's a doctor, so they don't see the world that you're probably going to end up in, right? And so to me, that's really the first thing, is people have that aha moment where they go, yeah, this is really what I should be doing. And I always say to them, just because you've got that, don't drop out of university, because you still need those base skills. you might find a great idea along the way where you drop out of university to go do it, but generally you need the base skills to get there.
Yeah, it's great perspective, great insights, and I really appreciate the perspective on mindset and focus. Peter, I'm going to pass it back to you for some questions.
Actually, your last discourse there was perfect to get into the question that I have, Dave, and that is talking to the kids and recognizing if you are an entrepreneur, if you aren't an entrepreneur. I wanted to wonder if you could share, if you could envision right now, there's a 30-year-old and they started their company and they're having challenges, they're just the normal challenges you have at a 2-year-old company. And they know this guy, Dave, he's had lots of success and he's a pretty good negotiator. And I'd like you to share with your thoughts, if there are any rules of negotiating that you can articulate for the audience.
Again, it would be the difference between where we all started and where we are today, right? Where we all started was you negotiate whatever deal you can, and be damned who wins as long as you get the most you can get, right? And then you realize over time that probably wins you that negotiation, but really, so I'll give you a perfect example. We bought a building from a gentleman 3 years ago, and when we took it over, it was the worst operated building we had ever bought. So, when we got there, the sign at the front gate was leaning over. You went inside the leasing office and it smelled. And so for us, I could go on and list you 20 different things that were all bad about this building. When you find a building that has 20 things that are bad with it and you make those 20 things good, you make a lot of money in real estate. I won't tell you anything more than that, but if you know that, if you walk into a leasing office in a building and it smells, you call me, I want to buy that building. So here we are, we walk into the building, we end up negotiating, and at the end, we debated long and hard because there were some things wrong with it, how much we wanted to negotiate on the price and get a better deal. And we ended up, without too much negotiating, buying the building, and we got a great deal, okay? Well, 2 years later, our phone rang, and the same owner called and said, hey, I have 2 other buildings that I'm now thinking of selling. Would you guys be interested? Well, I will assure you one thing, as you know, Peter, in the apartment rental business, if someone runs one building terribly, there's very little chance when you go to the other 2 buildings they'll run any better. So sure enough, we went and looked at the other 2 buildings. We made a deal with him in about 2 minutes. We struck a deal and bought the other 2 buildings. And those 3 buildings probably turn out to be 3 of the best deals we've ever bought. Now, if I had gone back to 30 years ago, I would have negotiated, I would have ground the price, I would have done 10 different things, and I probably would have got the first deal and got a good price, but I probably would never have had the relationship to get the next 2 buildings. So
saying is do a lot of negotiating as you move along your career path and you get better at it. Just a question out of the blue. Is there anybody that you hold as somebody you look up to that you can take some guidance from? Like, I'm thinking up there high, Branson, or just people that you get a bit of motivation from. What motivates you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I still believe that if you were ranking, some of the greatest people that we've seen in our lifetimes, I think you'd have to put Bill Gates up there. And I think, first of all, because of the fortune he's created with what he's done, but then the fact, knowing how hard it is to leave the world of business permanently, to go and, we all leave a foot in the door of business and a foot out the door of doing good in the world. And, the fact that someone at that level is doing so much good in the world, I would have to say that there are other people I think that are doing phenomenal things in the world, but he would certainly rank as one of the people that I would rank up there pretty high, just simply for having, taking everything he has and giving it away. That's phenomenal. That's a small percentage of people that would do that. But then to dedicate, his prime working time to make the world better, to me, is phenomenal.
Dave, with all the experience and everything you've had, what's next for Dave? What's what are you thinking about? What's on the horizon?
I just turned 60. The problem is, you never can control the point in life. We have two kind of tigers by the tail. We have a phenomenal business growing in the States, buying apartments, and we're building new rental apartment buildings in Canada. So, both the businesses are really kind of rapidly growing. And, the new challenge is I don't want to work as much. So it's how do you find that balance of finding more free time, but as I don't have to tell you, it's not quite ready to roll up on the couch with a nice blanket and do nothing. So I don't know that I've solved it yet. Maybe as one of my mentors, I'll call you and get your feedback.
Good. Well, I think it's John Anderson wrote a good book on retirement, and it's really, we don't retire. We just slow down. We don't do as many deals. We slow down a bit.
Yeah. One last question here, Dave, before we wrap it up and let you get back to whatever it is you want to do, the next deal, or you can just go sit on the couch if you'd like. I would be curious if you were to provide just parting advice to entrepreneurs in this time. We are faced with some pretty big challenges right now, and individuals are trying to make the decision: do we just raise the prices of our meals by twice as much because we can only accommodate takeouts or 50% of occupancy in our restaurants these days? What would be some of your best advice to entrepreneurs right now as we face the world as we face it today?
Refine the experience, figure out what business you're in and refine the experience. You've got a great opportunity now because there's lots of people around that'll talk to you. We've probably never had a time in our life where you can so easily get whoever you want on a phone call or a Zoom call. People want something to get behind. The big learning for me around everything that we've done with everything that's charitable is just what a magnet it is to bring people into our company, what a magnet it is to attract the tribe of people that want to be part of what we're doing. So, figure out what that vision, figure out what that magnet is that's going to draw. Who are the people you want in your tribe, and how are you going to get them? I think probably more than anything is figure out what the big trends are. What is the opportunity that exists today in the business you're in or another business that gives you a leg up that didn't exist 3 months ago? Because the world's changed. It's completely changed. A lot of it's not going back to what it was. I look at a lot of people my age that were working 100 hours a week that are now maybe working 60 hours a week. And I don't know that a lot of those people are going back to 100 hours a week. So look at those things and say to yourself, what are the big changes? Identify them, and then ask yourself, where the opportunity is in it. And find lots of people to talk about it. Because when you figure out what they are, talk about it, because it's not always the headline that's right. The headline might sound good, but if you and Peter and I talked about something for 30 minutes, we might decide the headline is correct, but the real fact of what that headline is might be different after the three of us talked about it for half an hour.
Yeah, great. I so appreciate it. And thanks so much for your time with that, Dave. Peter, I'm going to hand it back to you for final questions or to wrap up the Entrepreneur Masterclass.
Yeah, well, Dave, I'm going to let you off the hook. You've been fabulous, Dave, and I know that the people who are listening to this, you're going to be a great professor of the masterclass. A lot of tips here, a lot of learnings, and be able to watch this over and over again. So I'm really honored, Dave, that I get the time to get you on tape with a lot of your opinions and your learning. So I want to thank you for being part of the first group of masterclass. You're one of the first 12, Dave. You're the final one in the first 12. So I appreciate you in my life, and thank you so much for your gift.
Thank you. It's very inspiring that you guys have done this. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Tim.